Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis,
Mm.
there's this expectation of like extreme, unarguable precision.
Right. It's very binary.
Yeah, exactly. It's like mechanical engineering. You
Yeah.
fall off a bike, you break your arm, the x-ray comes back showing that unmistakable jagged white line across the bone, and the doctor just taps the screen with a pen and says, there it is, that's the problem.
Right. The bone is broken or the bone is intact. The data is entirely clean.
Exactly. And we crave that same clean binary feedback in our professional lives, don't we? I mean, you apply for the promotion and you get it, or you don't.
You hit the quarterly KPI or you miss it by 4%.
Yeah, you secure the client or they go with the competitor. We love a clean chart because a clean chart tells us exactly where we stand.
Oh, absolutely. It's deeply comforting to the human brain. We are meaning-making machines, and we desperately want the metrics of how we spend the majority of our waking adult hours to be highly visible. We want them easily categorized.
But then you step out of that theoretical framework and into the actual lived reality of the world of work, and suddenly that pristine x-ray machine is completely broken.
Right.
We end up looking at a professional landscape that is honestly just murky. Because underneath the job titles and the Slack channels and the paychecks, there is a massive subterranean infrastructure being forged day by day,
Yeah.
hour by hour.
Yeah, and none of it is visible on a LinkedIn profile.
None of it.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. We spend a disproportionate amount of our cognitive energy obsessing over the surface metrics of a career.
Like the salary band or the office location.
Exactly, or the prestige of the company name. And because we obsess over those things, we completely miss the internal architecture being constructed beneath the waterline.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately. Because if you are listening to this right now, whether you are 22 years old, fresh out of college, trying to navigate the confusing politics of your very first entry-level role,
Or you're a seasoned executive managing a massive global division.
yeah, or maybe you're just sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic right now, feeling utterly suffocated by the daily grind, we are going to give you a totally new lens for measuring your own professional success. Today's deep dive is all about that. We're looking at work not as a corporate ladder to be climbed.
And not merely as an annoying daily chore you endure for a paycheck.
Right, but as a masterclass in human character, we're drawing on a ton of sources today. Historical figures, modern business practices, and some really profound observations about human nature. The mission is to completely reframe how you think about your career.
The premise here really challenges the very foundation of how modern society views labor. The most frequent question people ask about their career is, well, what am I getting out of this?
Or maybe, how high can I climb in this hierarchy?
Exactly. But the ultimate transformative question isn't about extraction. The question is, what kind of person is this work making me?
And before we get accused of living in a philosophical ivory tower, let's just directly address the very loud, very real elephant in the room.
The economic reality.
The economic reality. Work pays the bills. It buys the groceries. It keeps the heat on in the winter. If someone is listening to this and they are actively struggling to provide for their family, or they just survived a brutal round of corporate layoffs.
They don't necessarily want a lofty lecture about the spiritual purpose of their spreadsheets.
Right, they need a mechanism to meet their financial obligations. Reducing work to survival is a completely rational, understandable response to the pressures of life.
It is entirely rational.
Right.
I mean, you cannot skip Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You have to secure the foundation of physical security before you can build anything else.
Yeah.
But there is a crucial defining distinction we have to make right here at the start. A paycheck is an incredibly effective tool for explaining the why of work.
It explains why you set your alarm for 5:45 a.m. on a dark, freezing Tuesday morning.
Exactly. It explains why you tolerate an hour-long commute. But a paycheck completely fails to explain what the work actually does to the neurological and moral wiring of the human being performing it.
There is an observation from President Woodrow Wilson that perfectly captures this tension. He said, and I'm quoting here, "You are not here merely to make a living. You are here in order to enable the world to live more amply, with greater vision, with a finer spirit of hope and achievement. You are here to enrich the world, and you impoverish yourself if you forget the errand."
You impoverish yourself if you forget the errand. The language there is just so deliberate. When he uses the word impoverish, he clearly isn't talking about financial ruin.
No, not at all.
He is talking about a poverty of spirit, a poverty of character. He is laying out a reality where you can possess a massive, overflowing bank account, stock options, and the corner
With
office.
the floor-to-ceiling windows.
Right, the whole package.
Mm.
But if you treat your daily labor merely as a transactional extraction of wealth, you actively hollow yourself out. You become a diminished version of the person you could have been.
I hear that, and part of me is incredibly moved by it. But let me push back hard on this on behalf of the listener. Wilson was an academic, right? A university president and then the president of the United States. His work inherently had a grand stage.
It did.
So isn't it a bit romantic, maybe even naive, to tell the mid-level logistics coordinator or the person doing data entry for an insurance firm that their work is this grand character-building errand? Especially when the modern corporate machine often treats them like a completely disposable line item.
It's an essential challenge. It really is. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, if we actually look at the historical data and the macroeconomic reality of the modern workplace, this character-building approach isn't a romantic luxury. It is a hardcore survival necessity.
Wait, really? A survival necessity?
Yes, because the old career bargain that defined the mid-20th century is completely irrevocably dead.
You mean the Gold Watch retirement paradigm?
Exactly. The social contract where you join a massive corporation at 22,
Right.
you pledge your absolute unquestioning loyalty, you keep your head down.
And the company repays that loyalty with lifelong stability, health care, and a guaranteed pension.
Right, that bargain has evaporated. If you look at longitudinal tracking from the Bureau of Labor Statistics focusing on workers born in the late 1950s and early 1960s, by the time that cohort hit age 58, they had held an average of 12.9 different jobs.
Almost 13 different jobs. That is an incredible amount of professional whiplash.
And the velocity of that change is only accelerating. If you look at contemporary data for the median American wage and salary worker today, their tenure with their current employer hovers right around 4 years.
Wow.
And in the private sector, it drops down to just 3.5 years.
So the days of outsourcing your professional identity and your long-term security to a single corporate monolith are just gone. You are going to bounce from organization to organization.
Your entire industry might get disrupted overnight.
Yeah, the technology you spent 4 years mastering might be rendered obsolete by an AI model next Tuesday.
Precisely. The modern labor market simply does not offer the structural guarantees it once did. You cannot rely on a company to carry you. You can't even rely on a single specialized academic credential to carry you indefinitely, because the half-life of technical knowledge is shrinking rapidly.
So the terrifying but liberating question becomes, if you can't carry a job title with you forever, what do you carry from building to building?
You have to carry something much deeper, something completely portable. You carry your internalized habits, your earned judgment, and your fundamental integrity.
That makes total sense. It reminds me of the underlying mechanics of going to the gym. If we're being honest, a massive percentage of people who start a gym routine do it for purely surface-level aesthetic reasons.
Right, to look good in a swimsuit.
Yeah, they want to look good for a summer vacation, or they want to fit into a specific outfit for a wedding. That aesthetic desire is the equivalent of working just to pay the rent or chase the end-of-year bonus. It's the surface motivation that gets you through the front door.
It's the immediate, visible incentive.
But here's the biological reality. While you are in there, lifting those heavy weights purely because you want bigger biceps or a slimmer waist, your body is quietly executing a much deeper, entirely invisible protocol. By repeatedly exposing your skeletal system to physical resistance, you are actively increasing your bone density. You are permanently expanding your cardiovascular capacity. You are physically rewiring your central nervous system to understand how to process and adapt to stress without panicking.
That's a great point.
That is the biological equivalent of character formation. You might walk into the office strictly for the paycheck, but the daily grinding resistance of the job is secretly building your internal infrastructure.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it.
Yeah.
Because the crucial ingredient in both the gym and the workplace is resistance. We have this cinematic delusion that character is forged in these sweeping, dramatic moments of high-stakes crisis.
I like where we make a heroic choice while a soaring orchestral soundtrack plays in the background.
Right, but that isn't how human psychology works. Character is forged in the incredibly ordinary, relentlessly unglamorous friction of a random Tuesday afternoon.
Yes, it's the micro moments. It happens when you are exhausted and you have to spend an extra hour preparing a brief for a meeting when you would so much rather just walk in and wing it.
It happens when you are sitting across a conference table, receiving blunt, critical feedback about a project you poured your heart into.
Oh, that's the worst.
And your entire ego is screaming at you to interrupt, to deflect, to aggressively defend yourself, and instead you force yourself to just sit quietly, take notes, and actually listen.
Or how about keeping a promise you made to a difficult client 3 weeks ago? In the moment you made the promise, you were energized, you wanted to close the deal, the dopamine was flowing.
But now is 3 weeks later trying.
Exactly. The mood that created the promise has completely evaporated, the client is being demanding, and you are left with nothing but the tedious, frustrating execution of the task.
Those moments are invisible to the wider world. There is no audience. Nobody is throwing you a parade for double-checking the formatting on a spreadsheet or biting your tongue when a colleague is being wildly unreasonable.
Yeah.
But neurologically and morally, those ordinary, frustrating moments are the exact cellular process where transient habits harden into permanent character traits.
So if the landscape is constantly shifting under our feet and the company won't carry us and we are responsible for forging our own internal infrastructure, it means adaptability isn't just a buzzword. It is the absolute non-negotiable survival skill of the 21st century.
It absolutely is.
Which forces us to look at the first major realization for anyone trying to build this kind of career. The absolute necessity of remaining a lifelong learner and the deep, often painful humility required in preparation.
It is the most common and perhaps the most devastating misconception people carry into the workforce. They fundamentally believe that their education concludes the moment their professional career commences.
Right, I got the degree, I'm done.
They frame their university diploma, or their specialized certification, as the finish line of their learning journey. They think, I acquired the knowledge, now I will simply dispense it for currency.
I learned the theory, now I just press the buttons.
Exactly. But in reality, that credential merely unlocked the door and allowed you to walk up to the starting line. Real education, the kind of dynamic, adaptive intelligence that makes an employee truly indispensable, only actually begins when your pristine theoretical knowledge violently collides with the crushing, unpredictable pressure of reality.
Because reality doesn't care about your textbook. A customer is going to call with a complex grievance that absolutely does not exist anywhere in your 300-page onboarding manual.
A global competitor is going to unexpectedly launch a disruptive product that makes your team's entire workflow completely obsolete overnight.
Yeah, the regulatory environment shifts, supply chains collapse. Work possesses this incredibly reliable, almost cruel ability to reveal exactly how little you actually know.
And how an individual metabolizes that specific revelation, that feeling of sudden, jarring ignorance, dictates the entire trajectory of their career. The professional who cannot tolerate the ego-bruising sensation of not knowing the answer will spend the next 30 years building defensive walls.
They'll hoard information.
They will blame other departments. They will become rigid. But the professional who views that feeling of ignorance not as an attack but as an invitation, that person spends their career compounding their value.
To do that effectively, though, you have to understand the distinction between what we might call the surface of your business and the system of your business.
This is a critical mental model. Let's break that down.
Okay, let's use the analogy of the plumbing in an old, complex house. The surface of the business is the beautiful, polished brass faucet in the kitchen. When you turn the handle, clean water flows out. Everyone can see the faucet. Everyone understands the function.
A restaurant serves meals. A bank underwrites loans. A software company deploys code.
Right. That is the surface function. And understanding it is necessary, but it is dangerously incomplete.
Because the faucet is just the final visible millimeter of a massive hidden reality.
Exactly. Beneath the floorboards and behind the drywall is the actual system. The pressurized pipes, the water heater, the main valve, the municipal grid connections. In a business, that hidden plumbing is the incredibly complex web of supply chain logistics, the razor-thin profit margins.
The brutal regulatory constraints.
Yeah, the fragile internal politics,
Yeah.
and the quiet daily compromises constantly being negotiated between the marketing department and the legal department. It's the hidden arrangements that make the visible work, the water flowing from the faucet, even possible. And if you want to be truly exceptional, you cannot just memorize how to turn the handle. You have to understand the pipes.
But here is the challenge that creates. How does an individual actually achieve that? Let's say you, as a listener, are a highly specialized graphic designer. You are hired to be world-class at visual communication. How do you balance remaining deeply rooted in that necessary expertise while remaining teachable enough to map out the rest of the company's plumbing?
You can't ask a graphic designer to also become an expert in corporate tax law or supply chain logistics.
No, you can't, and you shouldn't. The goal isn't universal expertise. The goal is operational fluency. Fluency is very different from mastery. If you are that graphic designer, you don't need a CPA license to understand a financial plumbing.
Right.
But you absolutely do need to understand enough about the overarching sales process to know exactly how your designs are being utilized in high-stakes pitches. You need to understand enough about the operational budget constraints to comprehend why your request for premium materials keeps getting rejected by procurement.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if you refuse to learn the broader system, you run the risk of becoming what is arguably the most dangerous archetype in any corporate environment: the intelligent but narrow employee.
Oh, the damage done by the highly intelligent, incredibly narrow expert is staggering.
It really is.
The failures are rarely due to a lack of IQ. They are failures of systemic curiosity.
Wow.
It's the brilliant, charismatic salesperson who successfully closes a multi-million-dollar contract by confidently promising the client a delivery timeline that the operations and engineering teams physically, mathematically cannot meet.
Or the razor-sharp financial analyst who looks purely at the isolated numbers on a spreadsheet and decides to aggressively cut a line item cost in the customer service department to save 2%.
Yeah.
And they pat themselves on the back for increasing margin, completely oblivious to the fact that they just gutted the specific high-touch feature that was single-handedly maintaining their core customer loyalty.
Exactly. When you only understand your specific, isolated silo, your brain tricks you into believing that your silo is the only reality that matters. The finance professional views every single friction point as a cost reduction problem.
The marketing professional views every failure as a brand awareness problem.
Arrogance thrives in a vacuum of narrow knowledge. But when you intentionally force yourself to trace the plumbing, to learn how the whole business actually breathes, it teaches you a profound, stabilizing humility. Because you suddenly viscerally realize how desperately your success depends on the invisible labor of dozens of other people.
Which naturally leads us to the concept of preparation. There is this legendary warning from the great basketball coach John Wooden. He said, when opportunity comes, it's too late to prepare.
When opportunity comes, it's too late to prepare. It is a chillingly accurate assessment of reality.
Because by the time the sudden crisis hits, or the unexpected promotion opens up, or the furious client is screaming on the other end of the phone line, the window for becoming capable has slammed shut.
It's completely closed.
The high-pressure event doesn't magically bestow competence upon you. It simply reveals the rigorous preparation you either did or did not do in the shadows.
So what does that quiet preparation actually look like in the modern workplace? It isn't glamorous. Nobody's going to make an inspiring TikTok video about it. It looks like deciding to read a dense, dry industry white paper on a Thursday evening when you're exhausted and just want to watch Netflix.
Yeah.
It looks like swallowing your pride and asking a senior colleague to let you buy them coffee so they can painstakingly explain the history of a legacy software system you don't fully understand.
It looks like a mid-level manager intentionally walking down to the customer service floor, putting on a headset, and sitting there for 2 hours just to hear the raw, unfiltered, completely unvarnished complaints of the actual human beings using the product.
Absolutely.
It's taking a weekend course on basic corporate accounting just so you aren't completely helpless when a complex profit and loss statement is put on your desk.
And engaging in that level of relentless preparation requires a fundamental shift in how you view your own identity. You have to stop treating your current job title as your core identity. A job title is just a temporary, highly fragile assignment. If your entire sense of professional self is wrapped up in being the senior director of regional sales, what happens to your psyche when that title is suddenly erased in an unexpected corporate restructuring? You are left completely unmoored.
But if your foundational identity is simply insatiable learner and relentless problem solver, you become bulletproof. You can transport that identity into any room, into any new industry, and add immediate value.
However, you can map out the entire plumbing system. You can memorize every financial metric and read every operational manual, and absolutely none of it will matter if you lack the capacity to navigate the single most volatile, complex, and deeply unpredictable variable inside any business system on Earth.
The human beings.
The human beings.
Work is a deeply relational endeavor, all the way down to the absolute bedrock. A company is not just a mathematical equation, it is a chaotic ecosystem of human emotion. Which brings us to a concept I am absolutely obsessed with. It's called duck diplomacy.
Duck diplomacy. It is the perfect visual metaphor for professional grace under intense pressure. The concept is simple. Picture a duck gliding across the surface of a pond. Above the waterline, the duck appears perfectly calm, serene, and completely unbothered.
But beneath the surface,
Hidden from view, its webbed feet are paddling furiously just to maintain momentum.
let me stop you there, though. Because when I first heard the phrase duck diplomacy, my immediate cynical reaction was, wait, isn't that just a cute term for toxic masking? Are we essentially advising listeners to suppress their authentic anxiety, paste on a fake smile, and pretend everything is fine while they are internally having a panic attack until they eventually burn out?
That is a very common and very understandable misinterpretation. But duck diplomacy is absolutely not about toxic suppression or living in denial. If the boat is sinking, you don't smile and say the weather is lovely. Duck diplomacy is about the mature regulation of your emotional exhaust.
Emotional exhaust.
Elaborate on that.
Think of a leader's panic like carbon monoxide. If you are leading a team or even just collaborating closely on a high-stakes project and you encounter a massive problem, you are going to feel fear. You are going to feel stress. That is the internal paddling.
Right.
But if you immediately vent that raw panic outward, if you start rushing around the office, snapping at juniors, sending frantic all-caps emails at 11 p.m., you are pumping toxic emotional exhaust into the team's shared air supply. You induce a secondary panic in everyone around you, which completely paralyzes their ability to creatively solve the problem.
Wow.
The serene surface of the duck is a deliberate choice to absorb the anxiety yourself so that your team feels safe enough to focus on the solution. Okay, that frames it entirely differently. It's not about lying to them, it's about protecting their cognitive bandwidth. And this highlights a massive blind spot in corporate culture. We constantly dismiss communication and emotional regulation as soft skills. We use that term almost pejoratively, contrasting them with the supposedly superior hard skills like Python coding, financial modeling, or supply chain logistics.
It is a catastrophic mislabeling. In reality, what we call soft skills are the absolute hardest, most complex skills to master. When you do the post-mortem on almost any massive business failure, you rarely find a pure technical breakdown at the root. You almost always find a communication failure.
Like the critical concern about a safety defect wasn't raised because the engineering team was terrified of the VP.
Exactly. Or the core need of the customer wasn't truly heard because the account manager was too busy formulating the rebuttal.
Let me give you a very specific modern observation that I think perfectly proves how profoundly we struggle with relational fluency. Think about the modern office building. You walk into the main lobby, or you step into the elevator. Two colleagues, who work on the exact same floor, step into the elevator car and stand a few feet apart. The doors close. What happens instantly, almost as an autonomic reflex?
They both immediately drop their heads and reach for their smartphones.
Instantly. It's like a synchronized dance. The glowing screen of the phone becomes this immediate physical shield deployed to protect them from the minor, microscopic friction of a shared human moment. It protects us from the tiny, momentary awkwardness of making eye contact, saying good morning, or acknowledging the humanity of the person standing 24 inches away.
But here's the critical question we have to ask about that behavior. Why does that seemingly trivial, completely harmless habit of dodging small talk in a lobby actually degrade our ability to execute high-stakes corporate collaboration?
Because collaboration is not a magical state that instantly activates just because a manager booked a conference room and put a printed agenda on the table. Collaboration is a fragile muscle. It relies entirely on a pre-existing foundation of relational fluency. If you spend your entire working life practicing isolation, if you treat every single unplanned human encounter as an annoying obstacle to be escaped via your phone screen, you are allowing that relational muscle to completely atrophy.
Exactly. You lose the nuanced ability to read the subtle shift in a colleague's body language.
Yeah.
You forget how to interpret the hesitation in their tone of voice. You lose the instinct to ask the gentle probing question when someone says they're fine but clearly aren't.
Yeah.
So when the massive project inevitably goes completely off the rails and the stakes are existential and tensions are high, you have zero accumulated relational capital to draw upon to navigate the crisis.
And trust is actual literal capital in an organization.
Yeah.
It is the invisible currency that dictates the speed of business.
It dictates everything. When interpersonal trust is absent in an organization, everything becomes incredibly heavy and agonizingly slow. People begin to manage risk defensively. They CC 10 extra executives on a routine email just to legally cover their own tracks.
They demand every single instruction be documented in writing.
They hesitate to make basic decisions because they fear being scapegoated. The operational friction is immense, but when high trust is present, that friction simply vanishes. People naturally assume positive intent. Complex strategic decisions are finalized in a candid 5-minute hallway conversation instead of a grueling 3-week email chain.
The empirical data on this is absolutely undeniable. Look at Google's famous Project Aristotle. Google is a company built by analytical geniuses. They spent years and massive amounts of capital ruthlessly analyzing their internal data to figure out the precise algorithm for building a perfect, most effective team. They assumed it would be about putting all the highest IQ engineers or the most dominant personalities in one room.
But it wasn't.
It wasn't. The number one defining characteristic of their highest performing teams was psychological safety.
Psychological safety. The fundamental belief that you can take an intellectual risk, ask a seemingly stupid question, or admit a professional mistake without being embarrassed, marginalized, or punished by the group.
Yes. And on the terrifying flip side of that, you have the broader research projecting into the modern workforce. Data measuring employee sentiment shows that roughly 31% of U.S. employees are actively engaged at work. Think about the gravity of that statistic. 31%. That means that nearly 7 out of 10 people in the workforce are either completely checked out, quietly doing the absolute bare minimum to avoid being fired, or in some cases, actively toxically undermining the work of the organization.
You simply cannot build a vibrant character-led career if you are surrounded by that suffocating level of apathy, unless you possess a deep, sophisticated understanding of how to navigate the human element. And navigating that human element requires consistently passing what we should consider the moral test of the workplace.
The moral test. I love the weight of that phrase. What exactly constitutes the moral test of a workplace?
The true moral order of any organization and of any individual within it is revealed entirely by how people treat those who possess less formal structural power than they do. Anyone can be polite and respectful upward. Being deferential to the CEO or the person signing your bonus check isn't a sign of good character. It is just basic self-interested ambition. The true, unvarnished test of your character, the indicator of whether your courtesy is genuine or whether it depends entirely on transactional advantage, is how you speak to the receptionist when you are running late. How do you treat the external vendor when their delivery is delayed? How do you react to the junior intern who just made a very public, very embarrassing mistake?
That brings up a fascinating dynamic regarding how we handle mistakes and correction. There is a deeply ingrained psychological rule regarding public versus private behavior in a high-functioning environment. If you are in any kind of leadership position, formal or informal, and you have to correct a peer or a subordinate, there are rare times when you must do it publicly because a boundary was crossed and the standard needs to be clearly enforced for the psychological safety of the wider group. But the unbreakable rule is this: if you correct in public, you must praise in public.
It is a non-negotiable law of organizational psychology.
Because if you establish a culture where you tear people down and critique them in front of an audience, but you only ever offer your compliments and your praise in a quiet whisper behind closed doors, you are neurologically wiring your team for terror. You are teaching them that their failures will be treated as public spectacles, but their triumphs are mere afterthoughts. You aren't building accountability, you are breeding pure paranoia. When you shame someone publicly, their amygdala completely hijacks their brain. They shift instantly into survival mode. They aren't actually processing the logical lesson you are trying to teach them. Their brain is just recording the fact that you are a dangerous threat to their social survival.
Which perfectly illustrates why the traditional hierarchical understanding of power is so deeply flawed. This ties directly into the profound definition of leadership popularized by thinkers like John Maxwell. He completely strips away the corner offices, the impressive titles, and the organizational charts, and he distills leadership down to one single potent metric: influence.
Influence, not title.
Exactly. You do not need a managerial title bestowed upon you by an HR department to be a leader. A junior employee who has only been with the firm for 6 months can effectively lead an entire department simply by modeling calm, consistent, unshakable discipline. They lead by being the one person in the room who refuses to panic when the client suddenly changes the entire scope of the brief on a Friday afternoon. They lead by constantly looking to their left and to their right, ensuring their peers are supported and have what they need, rather than constantly craning their neck upward, performing for the boss to see if they're being noticed.
Look to your right and to your left. Don't worry about looking up. That will take care of itself.
Yeah.
That mentality is incredibly rare, and it hinges on the belief that no task is inherently beneath you. The exact moment you adopt the mindset that a specific task, whether it's taking out the recycling or proofreading a basic document, is somehow beneath your professional dignity, you have instantly lost the respect of the room.
You lose the room because you have signaled that your ego is more important than the mission.
But, and I know you were going to agree with me here, because we have to be ruthlessly practical, you cannot run a genuinely successful, resilient career strictly on good vibes, high psychological safety, and making friendly eye contact in the elevator.
No, you absolutely cannot.
Eventually, the goodwill runs out, the bill comes due, and you have to face the cold, hard, entirely unforgiving reality of the objective metrics. Okay, so I've built immense relational capital. Everyone in the building loves me. I'm a master of duck diplomacy. But what happens when the end of quarter spreadsheet is projected on the screen, and it shows that my department is bleeding money? Goodwill doesn't pay the server hosting costs. How do we reconcile being a highly relational people person with the brutal reality of profit margins?
This is the necessary tension. You must obsessively know the numbers of your business. Metrics are the ultimate unemotional lie detector in any organization.
Why are they so crucial in a team setting?
What's fascinating here is that a business environment stripped of objective numbers instantly devolves into a chaotic arena of competing opinions. And in a room filled only with subjective opinions, the loudest, most aggressive voice usually wins. Or the most charismatic, charming person wins.
Or simply the highest paid person in the room wins by default.
Exactly. Objective numbers aggressively interrupt that toxic dynamic. They are a profound equalizer. They slice right through the fog of personality. The spreadsheet doesn't care how charming the sales director is. It simply reveals whether the revenue is actually rising, whether the profit margins are silently bleeding out, and whether the core customers are actually returning or churning.
But, and this is a massive flashing red warning light that we have to talk about, if you become too trusting of the numbers, if you worship the dashboard, you lose the essential human context. Numbers are incredibly powerful at pointing you in a specific direction, but they are almost never, ever the complete answer. They illuminate the inefficiency, but they are entirely incapable of solving it.
Because a raw number, by definition, strips away all human context. An executive dashboard can flash red and tell you that employee turnover in the engineering department spiked by 40% over the last 90 days. The number is a flare in the night sky. It points precisely to where the fire is burning. But the number is completely silent on why the fire started. The spreadsheet cannot tell you if the newly promoted manager is exhibiting toxic behavior. It cannot tell you if the legacy software the team is forced to use is so broken it's causing daily burnout. Or if a well-funded competitor just leased an office across the street and is aggressively poaching your talent with 20% higher salaries. The numbers point. Human judgment investigates.
It is exactly like flying a modern commercial airplane. Relying entirely on your metrics and your dashboards is like a pilot deciding to fly a complex route through a storm purely by staring at the instruments in the cockpit. Now, let's be clear. Those instruments are vital. If you arrogantly ignore your altimeter and your airspeed indicator, you will stall the plane and crash.
Absolutely.
But if you become so hypnotized by the glowing dials that you never actually look out the physical window, you might fly a mathematically flawless, instrument-perfect trajectory straight into the jagged side of a granite mountain.
That is a terrifyingly accurate analogy. You absolutely have to look out the window. And the specific systemic danger of staring only at the instruments is captured flawlessly by an economic principle known as Goodhart's Law.
Goodhart's Law. This is one of those mental models that completely rewires how you see the world. Once you understand it, you see it operating everywhere. Let's really dive into the psychology of this for the listener.
At its core, Goodhart's Law states that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Why is that? Why does human nature actively destroy the metric?
Because the human brain is fundamentally an incredibly efficient, energy-saving device. It will always ruthlessly seek the path of least resistance to secure a promised reward or avoid a promised punishment. The moment leadership ties people's financial compensation, their social status, or their performance review to a single, isolated numerical metric, human nature completely takes over. People will instinctively optimize all of their behavior to hit that specific target, entirely at the expense of everything else in the system.
Walk us through a specific, granular example of how this destroys a business from the inside out.
Let's look at the classic example of a massive customer service call center. Upper management looks at the financials and decides they need to increase operational efficiency to save money. So they introduce a metric called average handle time, which measures exactly how fast a representative can get a customer off the phone.
Okay.
They take this measure and they make it the ultimate target. They offer cash bonuses for the lowest times, and they threaten to fire the reps with the highest times. What happens next?
The reps immediately start rushing.
Exactly. But it's worse than just rushing. They start speaking incredibly fast. They provide incomplete, shallow answers just to end the interaction. They stop showing empathy to frustrated callers. In extreme but very real cases, employees will deliberately hang up on complex calls halfway through just to artificially drag their average time down.
Wow.
Now, if you are the executive sitting in the corner office looking purely at the dashboard, the metric of speed looks absolutely fantastic. It's a green arrow pointing up. You think you are a genius. But the hidden reality, the actual customer satisfaction and the long-term brand loyalty is completely cratering.
Or look at a high-pressure sales team. Leadership declares that new revenue is the only metric that matters for the quarterly bonuses. No other metric is rewarded. So the sales team, acting entirely rationally based on the incentive structure, starts aggressively overpromising software features that simply do not exist yet just to get the client to sign the contract today. The top-line revenue number skyrockets.
They get the win on paper.
Exactly. The sales team cashes massive commission checks. But 6 months later, when the client realizes they were lied to, the engineering team is drowning in impossible requests, the operations team is burned out, and the refund requests completely overwhelm the legal department. The target was hit, but the system was destroyed.
So the critical challenge becomes, how does an individual, whether they are a junior analyst or a senior VP, develop the specific type of judgment required to avoid this? Because you are walking a tightrope. You don't want to fall into sentimental management where you actively ignore terrible numbers just because you like your team and you naively hope things will magically improve.
Right.
But you desperately need to avoid the trap of mechanical management, where you treat complex human beings like programmable soulless cells in an Excel spreadsheet.
But how do you bridge that gap?
You develop that sophisticated judgment by obsessively, relentlessly asking, what is underneath the number? Whenever someone confidently presents a metric in a meeting, the wise professional asks the uncomfortable questions. Is this data actually clean? What is the precise, granular definition being used here? Has this metric been gamified by the team? If we aggressively push this specific number higher, what other department in this business is going to be forced to absorb the collateral damage?
And this demands that you actually understand basic business vocabulary. You cannot allow yourself to be mesmerized by what we call vanity metrics. You have to deeply understand the critical difference between top-line revenue and actual net profit. You have to know the difference between a company that is rapidly growing and a company that is fundamentally healthy.
Because a company can be incredibly busy, frantically growing its top-line revenue, hiring hundreds of people, and generating massive amounts of industry press, while quietly bleeding to death internally because the actual profit margins on every new sale are negative. If you lack the vocabulary, you will stand there applauding the revenue growth while the ship silently sinks beneath your feet.
Numbers demand analytical discipline, but true judgment requires immense humility. You must possess the humility to admit that the most complex, beautiful spreadsheet is still just a deeply flawed, incomplete, two-dimensional model of a wildly chaotic, three-dimensional reality. You cannot manage entirely from a screen. You have to walk the physical floor. You have to talk to the exhausted people actually performing the labor to see the messy reality that the clean numbers are desperately trying to summarize.
And that ability to integrate those two worlds, the human intuition of the floor and the objective data of the spreadsheet, relies entirely on a foundation of consistent daily execution. Which brings us to perhaps the most challenging section of our deep dive, the necessity of discipline, the inevitability of mistakes, and the absolute uncompromising refusal of mediocrity.
This is where the philosophical rubber meets the very hard, abrasive road. Because the observations we are looking at state a very painful, blunt truth. The vast majority of people exist in a state of comfortable mediocrity in their professional lives.
It sounds harsh, but it is empirically true. For millions of people, the workplace is merely a mildly annoying waiting room they must endure until the weekend arrives.
And let's be very careful here to clarify what we mean. This is absolutely not an endorsement of toxic hustle culture. We are not telling you to work 100-hour weeks, abandon your family, or make your corporate job the singular defining pillar of your human identity. But there is a profound, quiet tragedy in spending 40 hours a week for 40 years of your short time on this earth, existing in a state of disengaged, apathetic mediocrity. Theodore Roosevelt captured the alternative perfectly when he said, "Far and away the best prize that life offers is the chance to work hard at work worth doing."
Work hard at work worth doing. There is a deep, almost physiological satisfaction in genuine, focused exertion. But here is the insidious trap that catches so many smart people. Almost nobody becomes mediocre all at once. You don't wake up on a random Tuesday, look in the bathroom mirror, and consciously declare, "Today, I am going to permanently abandon all of my professional standards."
Right.
It does not happen in a single moment of dramatic collapse.
No, it is a slow, silent drift.
The drift is terrifying because it is so subtle. It is facilitated by 1,000 tiny, almost invisible permissions you grant yourself.
It's noticing a small formatting error in a presentation that goes out to a client and letting it slide because fixing it would mean staying at the office an extra 20 minutes. It's sitting quietly in a cross-departmental meeting, fully realizing that the proposed strategy is fundamentally flawed, but choosing to stay silent because you just don't want to deal with the social friction of disagreeing with the director.
It is the daily habit of confusing, frantic motion, answering dozens of trivial emails, shuffling papers, attending pointless update meetings with actual needle-moving progress.
Ah, yes.
It's adopting the passive mindset of waiting for someone else to set the standard of excellence instead of aggressively setting it yourself.
Yeah.
1,000 of those tiny rationalized concessions, compounded over a decade, mathematically equals a mediocre career.
And part of aggressively fighting that drift is completely reframing how you handle professional mistakes. Because if you are actually striving, if you are actively pushing the absolute boundary of your current competence, you are inevitably going to mess up. Ralph Waldo Emerson is quoted famously saying, "All life is an experiment. The more experiments you make, the better."
Which is a beautiful way to reframe a mistake from a devastating personal moral failure into a deeply valuable piece of empirical data. The critical factor is what mechanism you use to process that data. The concept of creating a memory library is vital here.
I really want to dig into this. Explain the mechanics of the memory library.
It is the conscious, disciplined habit of cataloging the architectural lessons from both successes and failures, both your own and those of the people around you. When you make a significant mistake, the natural human instinct is to hide it, deflect blame, or wallow in paralyzing shame. Building a memory library means you force yourself to clinically dissect the failure.
So ask the hard questions.
Exactly. What specific assumption proved to be wrong? Was it a failure of early communication? Was it a lack of technical training? Or were you simply rushing because you managed your time poorly? You extract the specific lesson and you file it away. But arguably, even more importantly, you meticulously watch others.
Because you don't have enough time in one lifetime to make every possible mistake yourself. You have to learn from the collateral damage of others.
Exactly. You do not have to fall into every open manhole to know the manhole exists. When a colleague pulls off a massive, unexpected win, you don't just envy them. You take them to lunch, you ask them exactly how they navigated the internal politics to secure the budget, and you file that exact blueprint in your library. When a major competitor's product launch fails spectacularly in the marketplace, you don't just laugh, you study their structural failure as if it were your own company's post-mortem.
Because the fascinating thing about business is that while the specific technological details and the names of the players constantly change, the underlying psychological patterns constantly, predictably repeat. If you possess a robust memory library, you can literally see the pattern emerging a mile away.
Yes, you can.
But to build that library and to avoid the drift into mediocrity requires an actual mechanism for daily discipline. It requires a system for protecting your attention. Which brings us to one of the most famous and deceptively simple productivity legends in modern business history, the Ivy Lee method.
The famous story of Charles Schwab and the Bethlehem Steel Corporation.
Yes. For the listener who hasn't encountered this story, it's incredible. Charles Schwab was the president of Bethlehem Steel in the early 1900s, making it one of the largest, most powerful corporations on the planet. He was successful, but he was completely overwhelmed, exhausted, and deeply frustrated because he felt like his executives were incredibly busy but weren't actually executing the truly important strategic goals.
Right.
So he brings in a highly sought-after consultant named Ivy Lee and demands a system to increase execution. And Ivy Lee simply hands him a blank sheet of paper.
And Lee says, write down the 6 most important things you have to do tomorrow.
Just 6, not 50. 6.
Then he instructs him, number those 6 items in the precise order of their strategic importance to you and to the company. Tomorrow morning, when you walk into the office, look at item number 1. Do not even look at the others. Start working on number 1 and stay fully engaged with it until it is completely finished. Then, and only then, do you move to item number 2. Do this until you quit for the day. If you only finish 1 or 2 things, it doesn't matter at all, because you are spending your energy on the absolute most important things.
And the historical legend is that Schwab implemented this exact system across his entire management team. Bethlehem Steel subsequently became the largest independent steel producer in the world, and Schwab was so staggered by the results that he wrote Ivy Lee a check for $25,000, which, adjusted for inflation, was an absolutely astronomical sum of money because the simplicity of the method was so brutally effective. But let me play aggressive devil's advocate here.
Please do.
I look at that story, and the elegant brilliance of the simplicity is undeniable. But Schwab was running a steel mill in 1918. He wasn't dealing with a modern digital avalanche. In a contemporary world defined by constant vibrating Slack notifications, Microsoft Teams pings, 400 emails a day, back-to-back Zoom meetings, and a boss who expects a response in 3 minutes, isn't the idea of writing down 6 things on a piece of physical paper and ignoring the world hopelessly almost laughably outdated? You cannot simply ignore your CEO messaging you because you're focusing on item number 1.
It is a very real, very painful modern challenge. The medium of our work has changed entirely, absolutely. But the underlying neurological vulnerability that Ivy Lee was attacking hasn't evolved one single bit. He was attacking the fundamental human tendency to confuse motion with progress.
Motion versus progress, that is the core distinction.
In the modern digital context, answering 50 rapid-fire Slack messages feels intensely like work. It provides your brain with a continuous, soothing drip of dopamine. Every time you clear a notification, you feel a micro sense of completion. You feel incredibly busy. You are undeniably in motion.
Right.
But if all 50 of those messages were trivial administrative updates or engaging in office gossip, and you spent your entire cognitive peak doing that, while actively subconsciously avoiding the incredibly difficult, ambiguous strategic planning document that actually dictates whether your company survives the next year, you have made 0 actual progress.
So it is not necessarily about literally barricading your door and ignoring the fire alarm. It is about the brutal discipline of ordered attention. It's about recognizing the psychological comfort of motion and rejecting it.
It's exactly. The refusal of mediocrity is not synonymous with the toxic obsession with perfectionism. It is the daily practice of ordered attention. It is the act of deciding, in the quiet moments before the chaotic avalanche of the day begins, what actually matters. Because nature abhors a vacuum. If you do not ruthlessly dictate your own agenda, your inbox will immediately dictate it for you.
That's so true.
The poorly planned emergencies of your coworkers will instantly become your primary agenda. John Maxwell has a brilliant operational principle that perfectly aligns with this. He argues that the secret of your long-term success is determined almost entirely by your daily agenda.
Because a career is not built in these massive, sweeping, heroic strokes. It is built in tiny, relentless increments. It is built in days. And wasted days compound violently over time. Avoidance compounds. The habit of doing the easiest, most trivial thing first compounds until it literally solidifies into a character trait. But the deeply encouraging flip side is equally true. Disciplined days compound. The habit of telling the hard truth compounds. The psychological tolerance required to tackle the hardest, most anxiety-inducing problem first thing in the morning compounds.
And that reality brings all of these seemingly disparate threads. The necessity of lifelong learning, the relational fluency of duck diplomacy, the balance of metrics and judgment, and the discipline of execution into one singular, enduring product, which forces us to zoom all the way out and look at the final overarching theme, the character of work and the ultimate long game.
This is where everything converges. Because you can be an absolute master of the Ivy Lee method, you can have a memory library filled with brilliant strategic insights, you can navigate the human system flawlessly, but if the foundational engine of your career lacks basic moral integrity, the entire structure eventually collapses under its own weight.
This raises an important question, though, about what integrity actually is. Honesty and character are not decorative elements, they are load-bearing walls. And we aren't just talking about avoiding catastrophic crimes like embezzling corporate funds or committing securities fraud.
Right, it's smaller than that.
We are talking about the agonizing micro-honesty of the daily grind. It's the choice to not take the administrative shortcut. It's the choice to not creatively manipulate the data to hit a quarterly quota. It's the choice to not throw a junior colleague under the bus to save your own reputation in a contentious meeting. It's the discipline of refusing to pretend you understand a concept when you are actually lost.
Stephen Covey pointed out that there are really only three true constants in human life and business: change, choice, and principles. The macroeconomic market will constantly change. Your individual choices will dictate how you tactically navigate that change. But principles. True north does not move. Fairness, profound honesty, the willingness to take absolute responsibility for your failures, those concepts never go obsolete. No AI will ever disrupt the value of integrity.
Which brings us to an incredibly profound question. Perhaps the most important psychological question we can ask. How is human character actually formed? We have this deeply ingrained, almost entirely false assumption that character is simply a set of abstract beliefs we hold in our minds. We think of ourselves, I intellectually believe in the concept of honesty, therefore I am inherently an honest person.
Right.
But the wisdom we've been exploring, beautifully articulated by the novelist George Eliot, argues something vastly more challenging. George Eliot wrote, "Our deeds determine us, as much as we determine our deeds."
Our deeds determine us as much as we determine our deeds. That is incredibly heavy. It means that character is not a static identity formed by your internal beliefs. It is an active, biological, and spiritual reality formed exclusively by your practiced actions.
Exactly. Dishonesty isn't just a catastrophic, headline-grabbing moral failure. Dishonesty is the quiet act of hiding a small accounting mistake. It is nodding your head in agreement during a strategy meeting when you secretly think the plan is going to fail.
Or allowing your boss to give you 100% of the credit for a presentation when a junior analyst actually did 40% of the heavy lifting.
A highly talented, brilliant employee who lacks micro-honesty is a massive ticking liability to an organization. And over the span of a decade, the worker who constantly practices cutting corners doesn't just produce bad work, they structurally become a corner cutter. It fundamentally alters their identity.
It is exactly like the concept of physical muscle memory and fascia. If you sit at your office desk right now and you practice slouching around your shoulders forward, you collapse your chest, you slump your spine, and you hold that exact posture for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 10 years. Eventually, the fascia tissue in your body physically tightens and adapts to that exact shape. You physically cannot stand up straight even if you desperately want to, because your physical body has literally become the shape of your daily habit.
That's a great visual.
George Eliot is telling us that the exact same physiological process happens to your soul. If you practice actively avoiding difficult, uncomfortable conversations at work, you don't just have a minor corporate communication deficiency, you systematically become a coward in your actual life. If you practice shifting the blame to your subordinates when a project fails, you become a person fundamentally incapable of taking responsibility in your marriage or in your relationships with your children. The imaginary, comforting firewall we build between work me and real me simply does not exist. It is a completely porous membrane. What you actively practice under the pressure of work inevitably bleeds into who you are in the quiet of your home. But crucially, the positive expression of this reality is equally powerful. When you dedicate yourself to doing true, excellent, honest work, it leaves a quiet, stabilizing mark on the world. And it leaves a profound, permanent mark on you.
Think about the massive, uncalculated stability created by a single human being doing their job with rigorous excellence. A family somewhere might depend entirely for their livelihood on the economic stability created by an obscure, mid-level quality assurance employee who is diligent enough to notice a tiny manufacturing defect early and brave enough to stop a bad product from shipping, saving the company from a disastrous recall.
That is profound, because nobody ever throws a parade for the disaster that didn't happen.
Exactly. Much of the most vital, foundational work in the world disappears entirely into the stability it creates, completely unapplauded and totally unacknowledged by the public. But the specific person who performed that invisible work, they know. And that quiet knowledge, that daily practiced integrity, slowly forges a sturdier, more resilient, more deeply grounded human being. That internal transformation is the true, lasting compensation of work well done.
Wow, okay, we have excavated an immense amount of incredibly dense ground today. And what strikes me most is how all of these seemingly different tactical concepts, The humility to map out the hidden plumbing of a business, the emotional regulation required for duck diplomacy, the intellectual rigor to look out the window instead of just staring at the dashboard, the relentless discipline to fight the slow drift into mediocrity, they all point toward the exact same destination.
They do. Because the ultimate measure of a career is not simply the accumulated wealth sitting in an index fund, or the fleeting prestige of the impressive titles printed beneath your name on a business card. Those external markers inevitably fade.
Right.
The true measure is the actual trust you built in the difficult rooms you occupied, the heavy burdens you voluntarily managed to lighten for the people working beside you, and ultimately, the specific kind of person that emerged from the crucible of those decades of labor.
It is a profound, entirely radical shift in how we view the hours between 9 and 5. And as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, lingering scenario to chew on. I want you to imagine walking into your office tomorrow morning or logging onto your remote workspace and discovering that overnight, by some strange magic, your impressive job title, your salary band, and your formal structural authority to tell anyone what to do have all been completely erased. You have absolutely zero structural power to compel obedience, based entirely on the daily habits you've built, the deep trust you've actually earned, the empathy you've shown in moments of crisis, and the fundamental way you have treated the people to your left and to your right. Would anyone still choose to follow you?